Unsolved.
Zodiac killer case, Blue Rock Springs Park. Who killed Darlene Ferrin? It was a Friday night on July 4th, 1969, approximately 11:40 p.m. A 1963 two-door Chevy Corvair pulled into the Blue Rock Springs parking lot. The car was being operated by Darlene, age 22, and in the front passenger seat was Michael, age 19. Within 5 minutes of being there, a few other cars drove in. Some firecrackers were lit off, and some teenagers were laughing their asses off. The teenagers drove off. Then, a few minutes later, another vehicle pulled in, stopped near the back of Darlene's car, and Michael said, "Do you know who that is?" And she replied, "Oh, never mind." And then the unknown vehicle left. 5 or 10 minutes passed, and it was close to midnight. Then a vehicle entered, driven by a white man, and pulled up behind them. He got out of his car, walked up to the passenger side, shined a flashlight inside their car, and shot Michael and Darlene. Then he opened fire with multiple rounds. The man walked back towards his vehicle. Then Michael began screaming in pain. The man walked back and shot Michael and Darlene another 2 times. George Bryant, who lived up in the house on the golf course, described it this way. He could hear laughing and a few firecrackers being shot off, but he couldn't see anybody. George states that approximately midnight, he heard what appeared to be a gunshot. This was much louder than any of the firecrackers. A short time later, he heard what appeared to be another gunshot. After another short pause, he heard rapid fire of what appeared to be gunshots. He then heard a car take off at super speed, and it burned rubber and was squealing its tires. George called the police immediately. Then Deborah, 19, Roger, and Jerry, 17, pulled into the parking lot and found Michael lying on the ground. Deborah suggested they go call police. From Jerry's house, about 10 minutes later, she made the call. The police arrived and asked Michael a few questions, but he could hardly speak. "Do you know who shot you?" And he said no. "Can you give us a description?" First he said he couldn't, but then he said was a white male, young and heavy set, and he was by himself, and he was in a brown vehicle. And the police asked, "Did he say anything?" And Michael replied, "No, he just started shooting and kept shooting." Darlene was dead on arrival at the hospital at 12:38 a.m. So who was Darlene? Darlene Elizabeth Suennen was born on March 17, 1947. After she graduated from high school, she moved out of her parents' home in December of 1965, and she lived in the San Francisco area. There she met James Phillips, born on May 8, 1944, and they married on January 1, 1966 in Reno, Nevada. They honeymooned in the Virgin Islands and the Caribbean, and they traveled around the United States, and they lived in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Darlene went to Reno to get a divorce from James in February 1967, and that became final in June of '67. She worked at the IHOP around February 1967 through the end of '67. There she met Dean, and they married on August 3rd, 1967, and they lived at 560 Wallace in Vallejo. Darlene worked at Terry's Waffle Shop, and Dean worked at Caesar's Italian Restaurant. And they purchased a new home on 1300 Virginia Street on May 9th, 1969. And then Darlene was murdered on July 4th, 1969. So now we are going to go back to July 4th and see what Darlene did that day. And hopefully we will find some clues and we will investigate them. Darlene was a free spirit, so most likely the day started off with her sleeping in. And then she had plans with two different people. She had plans with her younger sister, Chris, to attend an Independence Day parade in the downtown area of Vallejo. And she had plans to go with Michael to the movies in San Francisco. Darlene had arranged with her father, Leo, to bring over a babysitter to watch Dina, her 1-year-old daughter. Leo and Chris left their house on Jordan Street and went and picked up Pamela Hansen, age 15, and Janet Noble, age 14, and drove them over to 1300 Virginia Street. Now, at this time in the afternoon, it was Darlene, Pamela, Janet, and Dina, her daughter, at their house, and Dean was at work at Caesar's. And either before or after this, Darlene called Michael to arrange to meet him at 7:30 to go to San Francisco to watch a movie. And approximately at 4 o'clock, she told the babysitter that she would be going with Christine downtown, and then afterwards going with Michael to San Francisco to watch a movie. Darlene and Christine left the babysitter and Dina and went to Caesar's to talk to Dean. Caesar's Italian Restaurant was owned by William Bill Lee and Carmela Lee, and Bill graduated from Vallejo High School in 1957, and his wife graduated in '58. Dean had a good relationship with his boss, and so they were planning on coming over after they closed up shop that night to celebrate the 4th of July. And Bill was age 30 and Carmela was age 29. And I couldn't find a photo of Bill when he was younger, so I used this retirement photo. Now at this moment in the video, we are going to pause following Darlene's movements on July 4th and introduce some persons of interest from Darlene's circle of friends and associates. Darlene worked at Terry's Waffle Shop, and she knew several people from there. The manager, Harley, her friend, Bobby Ramos, and Evelyn Olson, Louise McKee, and Jane Rhodes, and possibly Linda Gordon. And then people that came in and frequented the establishment were Michael and his twin brother Stephen, and then 3 police officers, Howard Buzz Gordon, Richard Hoffman, Steve Baldino, and bartender George William Waters, aka Paul the Bartender. Now, Darlene also had friends from San Francisco and around town. And so on this list we have Rick L. Crabtree, Jay Eisen, Ron Allen, Sydney, and Karen, the babysitter that she had before the night that she was murdered. And Rick Crabtree has no relationship to James Phillips, her ex-husband. Her ex-husband started using his mother's last name, and so he went by James Crabtree. And so they're not related and they're not the same person. And also, Nancy Drew doesn't like to miss out on any possible suspect. And so there was an A.L. Butler, the previous tenant of 1300 Virginia Street. So I'm going to conclude this episode by presenting 3 different possible suspects. And so the first is Darlene's ex-husband. At the time of her murder, he was 25 years old, and in the photo, he's 17 years old. And he was living in Santa Cruz at that time, in the hills. And then here's a side-by-side look at him compared to the sketch of the Zodiac killer. And again, there's a difference of 8 years there. The next suspect is Officer Howard Gordon, and he was 27 years old at the time of Darlene's murder. And in this photo, he's 16 years old. And here's a side-by-side look at him compared to the sketch of the Zodiac killer from the San Francisco murder. And the final suspect is George William Waters, and he was age 29 at the time of Darlene's murder. And in this photo, he's 24 years old. And here's a look at a side-by-side comparison to the Zodiac killer. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved, and on the next Zodiac killer case, we will pick up with Darlene's day and look at more suspects and see if we can find out who killed Darlene Ferrin. So I'll see you the next time.